Hello, good afternoon. We are going to wait just a minute to let people finish joining the webinar, and then we will begin. Okay, I think we're ready. Hello, welcome to the third Lunch and Learn presented by the Charlottesville Police Foundation and the Charlottesville Police Department. We're excited to be presenting this series and honored that you're joining us today. My name is Gail Milligan. I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation. We're deeply appreciative to the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy for facilitating this Zoom call today. So thank you, Diane and Katie. The Lunch and Learn series is one of the outcomes of our engagement in the community last year and is part of our core mission to engage, connect, and inform. In each session, members of the CPD will offer their unique insight into the work of the department and answer your questions. Before we begin, I wanted to briefly share an overview of our work at the CPF. Simply stated, the Charlottesville Police Foundation serves the community by serving the police. We seek to improve the quality of life in Charlottesville by offering a community partner for our police department. The foundation promotes excellence in police service by investing in programs that enhance our department and yet are beyond the reasonable reach of the city's budget. We reward excellence by celebrating the success of our department and the skills of our officers. And we strengthen the connections between the department and the public through outreach programs and community events. The most recent example is this Lunch and Learn series. Best examples of the diverse support we provide include housing grants that allow officers to live in the community they serve, an awards dinner and Officer of the Month programs, advanced training for officers, grants for specific needs such as K-9, technology, programs in the community, and outreach events like Cops for Kids Day, celebrated every year with the Boys and Girls Club, and also the Charlottesville Night Out, which celebrates police and community. To clarify, we are an independent 501c3 nonprofit, and while we partner with the CPD, we do not report to the CPD, the City Council, or any other part of the city government. We are not a police union, nor do we do the work commonly associated with police unions. To the extent that we advocate for the CPD, it is to improve the quality of policing as a community service. I make this note because during last summer, we learned there are several persisting misperceptions about the work we do and who we are. We'd like to clarify that when presented the opportunity. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Detective Jill Sawyer has been with the Charlottesville Police Department since December 2013, serving on midnight patrol, then the crime prevention unit, daylight patrol, and in November of 2019 was assigned as a forensic detective. While assigned to patrol, she served as an evidence technician from 2014 to 2019. In 2019, Detective Sawyer attended the Department of Forensic Science Academy in Richmond, Virginia, becoming a forensics technician. Sergeant Sean Marshall has been with the Charlottesville Police Department since August of 2007, first serving on midnight patrol, then daylight patrol when he was promoted to sergeant and assigned as the forensics unit supervisor. While assigned to patrol, he served as evidence technician from 2009 to 2018. In 2017, Sergeant Marshall attended the Department of Forensic Science Academy in Richmond, Virginia, becoming a forensics technician. A quick note before we start, we encourage you to add your questions to the Q&A box you'll see on your screen, but we'll hold the questions until the end. Detective Sawyer and Sergeant Marshall, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. So our presentation is about a day in the life of a forensic detective. We'll go through how our day-to-day jobs, how we process crime scenes, Sergeant Marshall's roles, and also my roles as a forensic detective. Our current staff of the forensics unit, we currently have 1 forensic sergeant, 1 forensic detective, 6 evidence technicians, which we recently just added 2 more, so we have 8 total now, and 2 forensics unit support specialists. Like Gail was saying, both me and Sergeant Marshall started out as evidence technicians. They still work patrol, but they also will assist us with processing crime scenes, or they'll process crime scenes on their own. They've been through a 40-hour basic in-house training with me, so they have the basic knowledge and understanding of how to process crime scenes.
All right, the role as a forensic sergeant, this is just a little cliff note of half the stuff I do. But to start with, responsibilities are mainly of the day-to-day administration, administrative and technical operation of the forensics unit. I ensure that the members understand and successfully complete their specific duties and responsibilities. That's to be ebb and flow to that, depending on the nature of what we're currently dealing with. Coordinate personnel responsibilities and ensure that all of the evidence and property is being properly and lawfully collected, preserved, and disposed of once they are deemed to be of no longer of evidentiary value. That entails we went from crime scene, collected, packaged, processed, documented, preserved, submission into the lab, Department of Forensic Science, where there's a laboratory at our central lab in Virginia that process for us, back to court, submission to court, collection from court, and then to the point of the maturation date of which by deemed there's beyond appeals and it's of no longer value. We then are responsible for the actual ensure that team members are properly trained in all areas and have analyzing, collecting, and processing of crime scenes, and ensure the latest procedures and techniques and technology advancements are being utilized by the department.
My role as a forensic detective, I document and process crime scenes, and we'll go later in the presentation in depth of how we do that. I oversee all the work that is completed by our evidence technicians. So they create case files. So I'll go over the case file and what's inside the case file. I will also look at their photographs they've taken and just document any notes that I see that I need to talk to them about or anything like that. I review all the death scene checklists. We have a checklist for every death scene we go to. So I just review those and make sure they're accurate and I can understand and read them. I request reports from ME and send them the reports they request. So suspicious deaths, whether it's an overdose or homicide or anything like that, they usually request reports or our records of the incidents, the reports that we've typed up and all the supplements with that. Sometimes they also request scene photographs. I'll send them those. And I also have to send them requests for the autopsy reports or the toxicology reports, just so we can get a cause of death and a manner of death and add it to the case file. I also do roll call training for patrol and forensics. So this is just basic stuff, whether it's fingerprint processing, processing stolen vehicles, minor B&Es, just to get them some basic understanding and knowledge about evidence and where it is in a crime scene and what they would be looking for. I also do monthly training for the current techs and the 40-hour training for the new technicians. So when we have processes for new technicians, they'll go through a 40-hour basic course with me, so they can process crime scenes on their own, hopefully, and assist us with the major ones. I also assist with destroying and entering evidence into PETS, which is our police evidence tracking system. We'll go over later in depth about what that is. And I assist investigations with search warrants and collecting evidence. They usually need to utilize me, whether it's just, taking photographs or obviously collecting and packaging their evidence, because I got the nice fancy camera. And then also inventory of all forensics equipment. So just making sure we have all our supplies and everything that we need for our scenes. And when we're running low, just let Sergeant Marshall know so we can order some new supplies.
Yeah, I think this. Part of the responsibility, she says, that we do go out and we process scenes. Our standard hours are Monday through Friday, but then we are also tasked with being on call 24/7. Part of that is a notification process by which how we identify and select individuals to respond to scenes to assist patrol division investigations, even our traffic crash unit with fatality crashes of documenting, preserving, and collecting of evidence. Point of contact is going to be 90% of the time would be me as the primary. Secondary is normally an individual that has either been into the Department of Forensic Science or elevated through in-house training to a level of proficiency that allows us to task them as being the next person into the line of chain to come up to process scenes. And then we get down to the support and secondaries, or typically patrol division level people who can handle, as Detective Sally was saying earlier, minor B&Es, minor incidents like larcenies from vehicles, vandalisms, things of that nature. But the primary officers would be your more major crime scenes, more complex B&Es, homicides, and just complex scenes, like I was saying earlier, the crash investigation to help document and preserve anything that comes from that. With that, the shift supervisor that's on duty will make a notification to the forensic point of contact, and from there, determine based off the nature of what the incident is. As you see on your screen, death scenes, homicides, suicides, suspicious deaths, undetermined causes of death, and again, we even get into where the age comes as a factor of determining the seriousness and the level at which we have individuals respond out. Other things can come into it. The violent felonies, assaults and serious injuries, robberies, serious, like we're talking about shots fired into occupied dwellings. Then we also get into elder and child abuse issues, where we will facilitate both investigations and adult and child protective services with documenting any sort of injuries or evidence collection from any alleged abuse situations. We continue into like even the sexual assaults. We talk about the rapes, assault, sexual assaults. Part of that is the scene complexity, and also with working with the University of Virginia Medical Hospital through the SANE program, which are specialized sexual assault nurse examiners who help forensically collect certain items for us from these incidents. We coordinate with collecting and the submission of these kits into our system, and ensuring that they're forwarded on to the Department of Forensic Science with 100% submission for all kits related to a serious assault like that. Other incidents are officer-involved shootings, missing persons, major B&Es, and mass casualties. Again, these will be initiated through the primary contact, and a first responding forensic technician would go out. From there, we determine any other calls as needed.
So basically, once I get that awesome phone call from Sergeant Marshall early in the morning, I obviously answer the phone call. I try to wake up. So he'll tell me, I need you to come out. So my basic questions will be like, what do we have? Where do I need to respond to? Location of the scene. Is there any additional scenes that I need to be worried about, whether there's a victim at the hospital, a car that's being towed to Shoals, or there's even a vehicle at the hospital that needs to be processing too. And then once I get that, I will then determine, do we need our forensics van, which you have a picture of the van and the trailer down there in the left-hand corner. And then also inside of the trailer is in the top right-hand corner, and inside of the van is the bottom right-hand corner. So based off of that information, whether we need more equipment, so we'll utilize the van and the trailer if we need more equipment with that, or we'll just take our vehicles out there. And most of our equipment that we need is in our vehicles currently. So now we're going to talk about how we process a crime scene, what our thought process is, the systematic approach that we go through. We're going to go through all the steps, even into packaging and submitting the evidence into PETs and everything like that. So after I get the phone call and I arrive on scene, some of the things that we would do first is question the first responding officer and supervisors. We just want to make sure what they touched, what they saw, evidence that's in the scene, basically what they saw. And also, we would also question the EMS if they're still on scene, anything like that. We just need the pertinent information because they were the first responding officers. We are arriving once the scene is already secure. And that's another big thing. When we get there, we need to make sure the scene is secure, basically with evidence tape, yellow police tape that you see around the scenes. We can also determine if we need to make it bigger or we need to make it smaller. Bigger is always better because we can collapse it later once we determine the scene. Also, when I usually get on scene, once I get all that, I check in with Sergeant Marshall, or if we already have evidence techs on scene, I check in with them to see if they've already started overall photographs or if they've started, doing anything else. And then we'll also get the organization of our thought, just determine what the crime scene is, and that will be based off my organization of thought. And communication is key, whether it's with the forensics personnel or also with investigations, because the bigger scenes, investigations will come out as well. So we need to keep a line of communications, whether it's even if or investigations as well. So now once we've got an overall understanding of our scene and how we're going to approach it and how we are going to process it, we go through systematic approach, which it consists of 3 phases. So these are the 3 phases we go through on each crime scene. Every crime scene is different, but we always will go through these 3 phases and do all the tasks in these 3 phases. So you got your initial phase, which is your first phase. In that phase, you will complete your overall photographs of the scene, of the entire scene. So you'll also approach the scene, begin note taking, always document and take notes. That's important. And your rough sketch is also initiated during this process too. And then you'll go into your collection phase, which is logical progression. That basically is how you progress through the scene. So you want to start, if it's windy outside, you might want to start collecting things that'll blow away faster. Or if it's starting to rain, you might want to collect things that will, be wiped away from the rain, whether it's, blood or anything like that, DNA related. Sometimes investigations want us to maybe possibly get a phone first or an ID of the person. So if you go see that, you can also deviate and go to collecting those items first. And also this collection phase, you do mid-range photographs, close-up photographs, both without and with scale, and then you also measure the item of evidence. And then that's when you can physically collect it and place it into a packaging material. And then final phase is when you get a little bit more in-depth with things. So you can do blood stain pattern analysis, trajectory, latent print processing. That's when you'd also do your furniture measurements, overall measurements, final scene search and collection of equipment. And the big thing is the fresh eyes search. Sometimes me and Sergeant Marshall are on scenes for 10 plus hours. It's important to get a fresh set of eyes in a scene, because sometimes you just walk by an item of evidence and you've been in there for 10 plus hours, and when fresh eyes comes in, they'll notice it right away. So it's always important to do those. And then also after that, we'll determine whether the scene can be released or held. Sometimes scenes take longer, so we can hold scenes as long as we can. We'll just have 24/7 security with the scene. A crime scene log is also kept during this, so we make sure who's in and out of the scene, and also document who's doing the scene security. Good. So these are just some examples of photographs of the initial phase. So you got like an establishing photograph. This is of a hotel. So you got your establishing photograph of the hotel sign, and then also just your overall photographs of the outside of the hotel. And also there is an example of a rough sketch. A lot of notes are on this rough sketch. I'm not a very good sketch person. Sergeant Marshall is definitely better at that. But it just takes practice. So basically, this is what you consider a bird's eye view. It's basically a floor plan of inside of a hotel room. So yeah, you just take all four corners, whether it's even a house, you take all four corners of the house photographs from the outside of the house. Those are considered your overall photographs. And an address or
Something's fixed and permanent to tie you back to the scene.
right, yeah, and an address is good for your establishing photographs or a street sign or anything. But yeah, just make sure you get a 360-degree photographs of the scene. So the collection phase, you have an example of a mid-range photograph, a close-up photograph without scale, and a close-up photograph with scale. So in your mid-range photograph, you obviously have to get the item of evidence in this photograph, but you also need fixed and permanent objects within that photograph in order to tie the item of evidence to that location. So in this photograph, you can see the buildings in the back, even the sidewalk right there, how it has a corner. But yeah, so like the tree wouldn't be fixed and permanent, obviously, because you can cut the tree down. But yeah, you just need to make sure you have at least two. We try to do at least two fixed and permanent objects within the photograph, along with the item of evidence. So you can see the item of evidence, the knife down there in the corner. You can put multiple items of evidence in one mid-range photograph if they're close together. And it also doesn't have to be centered, so it can be in the top, left, right, or the bottom. And then you got your close-up photograph. Try to fill the frame up as much as possible. Just get as detailed as possible close up. And then also then we do it with a scale. So you put your item number on there, who you are, date, and the case number, just to make sure we know what that item of evidence is. Final phase, this is some examples of final phase photography. So you got your blood stain pattern analysis photography, you got the blood sticks in there. This is a pretty in-depth photography process. So you photograph the blood stain pattern, and then you also do close-ups, several close-ups of this. And then you'll move over several inches and then do more photographs. So this is a pretty in-depth and long photography process for us, especially. And then you got shooting reconstruction photography, which is pretty cool. You get to utilize the lasers and the photography. So it's a lot of opening up the shutter speed and making sure you get the light and the laser in there with photograph wise. And then you got your alternate light source photography. That's a fingerprint. So we'll go over the equipment we have for that, but that's ALS photography, and that's a pretty good close-up of a fingerprint. Just some additional equipment that we can utilize. This isn't everything that we have. It's not like an inventory of everything we have, but it's just some additional cool equipment that we have accessible to us. We have an ALS, which is an alternate light source. We have a couple of those that we can utilize. We have a dental stone for footwear or tire wear impression, which is pretty cool. I have some photographs of that. And then we have microsil for tool mark impressions, but you can also lift latent prints with microsil as well. And then we have the electric static dust lifter, which is pretty cool. We utilize that. Let's say you have a dust shoe impression on the floor. You can use some oblique light to identify it. And then we would use the electric static dust lifter to lift that 2D print off the floor. And then we have our shooting reconstruction kit, which is basically just it's a large kit. It has dowel rods, lasers, an angle finder, a plumb bob. Yeah, and we also have like fog spray to also assist us with some sort of photography as well. But yeah, we use that kit for, shots fired into a dwelling where there's, bullet holes into a house or anything like that. There's also string in the kits because we can also string off the dowel rods to look at trajectory and where the bullets possibly have traveled through the house. And then we can take photographs of that trajectory, and we can, measure the bullet holes and get measurements and everything like that for more in-depth trajectory work.
Yeah, what that goes entail to is orienting you back to the point of origin of where the potential source of said shots were coming from. Comes super critical in a lot of our major cases when individuals will speak of self-defense and say they're at one location and not as opposed to another. So it's really getting into the technicalities of, like I said, again, your angles and your math to place people back to the origin point. And again, it takes more additional ongoing training to stay proficient with these skill sets.
Yeah, and also with vehicles, origins, let's say a bullet went through a window and the window's shattered, but you still have some pieces on the outside. We can string based off of where it's been shattered and everything like that. We can try to find the point of origin where the physical bullet went through the window. So I haven't really tried that as much, but with our major scenes, when it needs to be utilized, we've also been trained in that as well. So these are just some photographs of footwear impressions. So you got the 2D dust impression, which we would utilize the electric static dust lifter. I have a photograph of that I'll show you. So yeah, we would just photograph it as is, obviously throw a scale in there, and then you got your 3D footwear impression, which obviously it's in dirt, it's got some depth to it. So with this photograph, it's also a very longer process also with photography as well. You do your mid-range, your close-up with, close-up without scale, close-up with scale. And then you also have to do 3 different angles of light in order to get the different depth treads and shadows out of the image. It's pretty cool if you just kind of go through all the images, you can actually see the light change with the different depths. And then you have to do it from toe to heel, left to right, right to left, and then heel to toe. So you have to do it from 4 different angles to get the entire shoe wear impression. And then also there's the cast of a shoe wear impression. It's not the same one in the photograph, but it's a cast of the shoe wear impression. That's what dental stone, we utilize dental stone for that shoe wear impression. And I feel like shoe wear impressions get overlooked a lot. So we have had several cases where shoe impressions are found at the scene, and sometimes that's the only evidence we have. And then we obviously develop a suspect, we do a search warrant on a house, we find the shoes, and then boom, the shoes match the impression that we had at the scene. So that's a very important piece of evidence, I feel like, that just gets overlooked a lot. And it's been pretty cool to see how, man, look, these shoes I found at the search warrant, it matches the cast that we found or casted at the scene, and that ties him back at the scene. So
Yeah, and with that, there's different classes that they would go into that the lab will be looking at. Being a common class like Nike, you can identify the shoe as being a Nike, but then there's unique characteristics, which is another class that where everyone's gait, your step, your weight, how you position your body, it creates unique wear patterns on your shoes. And this is where it's very paramount that when we have the shoe that we collect in the cast, that the lab can analyze it and beyond a reasonable doubt say this was created by this one shoe, and they'll give a percentage of of the relatively number of comparisons, but it's astronomical that they're saying it's nearly impossible for anyone else to create the shoe wear to match back to the shoe that we've linked back to a scene.
So these are just some photographs of the equipment we have obviously access to. So you got your electric static dust lifter. Like I said, that's good for the 2D footwear impressions, dust impressions on the floor. We have Mylar sheets we place down on top of the impression. You put the plate next to the impression, not on top of the Mylar sheet. And then you basically put the, the device or the Pathfinder on top of the plate and the Mylar sheet. You turn it on and you'll see the static basically adhere to the surface. And once you turn it off, you'll use the roller to get all the air bubbles out, and you turn it off, you lift the print up, and the print will be on the Mylar sheet. it's a pretty cool process. Do you want to talk about the other two?
Yeah, okay. Other images that she has here is a Rufus, is a reflective ultraviolet imaging system. Best way to compare it, most people have seen or identified what was night vision. This is similar to that, but it's on the spectrum of ultraviolet. We utilize it for searching scenes to determine if items such as latent prints have been deposited. Through the spectrum of light that you're eliminating all the other bands, we're able to start determining the reflective nature of the deposit between the fingerprint, where it's the sweat, salt, and other minerals that are left as a deposit that consist of the fingerprint. The other is a hand LED alternative light source. Again, we go into different bandwidths of light to look for evidence utilizing this device. The common one we use is what we commonly refer to as the crime scene, bandwidth, which is a purplish blue light. In that light spectrum, we're able to determine, biological materials that may have been deposited. We will switch it over to other bandwidths to look for hair fibers, clothing fibers, because the light will interact with the material that the item is composed of, and it will fluoresce to us at that point in time to help determine if something has been left or deposited there.
You also got to put on these cool fashionable goggles to go along with the light source in order to see the items, because it's basically like a blue light, black light, blue light, and you don't want to burn or hurt your eyes when you're looking through that.
It's the color wheel.
Yeah.
Like most people in art class, your blue is here, your orange is here. It's always corresponding to what the other side of the light spectrum you're utilizing that you use the filter barrier to be able to view.
So now we're kind of on to, once we've basically cleared the crime scene, we've collected all the items of evidence that we have collected, and we've determined the crime scene can be, closed down and we can clear it. We come back and we'll go downstairs in our mini lab for most of this process. We'll take supplemental photographs of items of evidence if necessary, determine if any items of evidence need to go into the drying cabinet, whether it's just wet or it has blood that's still soaking wet that needs to go into the drying cabinet and dry, because if you package materials wet, they will mold and smell and basically get destroyed while sitting on our evidence shelves. And then we also follow, if we have any concerns or questions, we'll basically just go back to the evidence handling packaging guide at the DFS website. That's where me and Sergeant Marshall learned obviously how to package items of evidence, and we teach our guys the same way. And then once we've done all of that, we place the items on the temp shelf along with evidence tag that we have to fill out for those items of evidence. So this is just some examples of what we have downstairs in our mini lab. So we have a drying cabinet over here. So like I said, just wet clothes, obviously clothes that have been soaked in blood that have either come from the hospital or the scene. We place those items in there. We hang them up. We separate them with hangers and make sure their items of evidence aren't touching each other. We place a piece of brown paper at the bottom of the drying cabinet to collect any materials that have fallen off of the items of evidence, because that can be important, hairs, fibers, stuff like that. That's all items of evidence. We also package that piece of paper along with the items of evidence hanging. So, and also you got a fingerprint powder processing station. It's pretty cool. You got some lights in there. You got several different powders you can use. You can turn it on and the powder will basically be sucked down into the bottom of the machine, so the powder and dust isn't flowing and getting on you and everything like that. So you can do some additional processing there. I processed several bottles in there that I've collected from the scene. See if I can get any latent prints off those. Just some further examples. We also have a fuming chamber downstairs in the mini lab. I mostly utilize this when I do super gluing. So basically we use a big fish tank. You got your heat source in there and you got glue and water, and you can, you turn the heat source on, you put your item of evidence in there, and the heat source and the vapors from the glue will adhere to the bottle and hopefully develop latent prints off of those bottles. You pull the slide down, you turn on your blower and your light, and that just pulls the fumes out from inside of the chamber. You can also hang things in there if they need to dry as well, if the drying cabinet's too full. And then you got a supplemental photograph of a cartridge case. We call these that's a head stamp photograph. So investigations really likes when we take head stamp photographs of each cartridge case we collect. So basically, it just says obviously the brand of ammunition and the caliber of those, and you also need to include a scale in there with those supplemental photographs. We also take pictures of clothing. We emphasize the stains that we see on the clothing, the holes that we see on the clothing, anything that's of evidence that we need to take further photographs of. And then we also have a processing table. This is mostly utilized for photographs. The table can rise up and down. You put brown butcher paper on the bottom of the table. You lay your item of evidence on there, and you can photograph it further. These are just some examples of packaging material. It's definitely not all of them. So you got your manila envelopes, 3 sizes. The smallest one is definitely the smallest packaging material the lab will take. You got brown paper bags, and then also you got an example of a property, basically an evidence tag. So one evidence tag per package. You can put multiple items of evidence on your tag, but it has to be just one packaging material per evidence tag. So the officers will fill that out and then place all the items of evidence onto the temp shelf.
This is where chain of custody is developed and documented. And then from this form, it's translated over to our PETS, our police evidence tracking system, into electronic format. But this is a hard copy that's maintained for every item of evidence that is submitted into the forensics unit. And speaking of the items that are submitted into the forensics unit, this is where our forensic unit support specialists will come in. These are 2 civilians that are full-time employees that are in our forensics vault and lab downstairs. Their duties are just a little quick rundown. Be like they check the temporary shelves and for evidence and property that have been submitted into the department. They then check for the accuracy and the packaging of both the packaging and the evidence tag that are being submitted. And from there, they do the initial entry into the PET system. And as we see, the PET's acronym is for Police Evidence Tracking System. From there, they manage the property that's in downstairs, managing it from the temporary lockers, entering into the system, and then merging it onto the appropriate storage area within our forensics unit. That unit is broke up into 5 different areas, depending on the longevity of how long it would be kept. The size of it would dictate where they would end up selecting where these items would be housed and stored.
So these are just some examples of where we can store items of evidence. So the evidence temp shelves, the only people who have access to those shelves are the forensics unit, which what it consists of, and also the evidence technicians that have a key in order to get back into the mini lab. So they're the only ones that have actual access to the temp shelves. And then we also have the temp lockers, which everybody has access to, whether it's patrol, investigations, anybody within the police department has access to the temp lockers. They'll place their item of evidence along with the evidence tag inside the temp locker, and then they'll just lock the locker. And then Diane and Lars, which are our forensics unit specialists, will go in there and check the lockers daily for the items of evidence that have been stored in there. And then this is a picture of where currently our evidence storage shelves are. There's 4 rolling shelves back there, you think? At least 4 rolling shelves back there. They're not all full. This is more where we keep the most recent items of evidence that we currently have within the department. We do have a lot of evidence for sure within the department, so. These are just some more photographs of where items of evidence are stored once Diane and Lars, our forensics support specialists, have entered them into PETs and will store them on shelves. So you got your narcotics and money lockers. I would say the greenish locker right there is just strictly for the money, and you got your narcotics in the tan lockers, which we have several lockers of those. You got a photograph of the guns and narcotics paraphernalia shelves. So the narcotics paraphernalia goes on the shelf to the left in that photograph, and the firearms will go on the right in that photograph. And then also we have another evidence storage shelves. This is where more of the older items of evidence have been stored. And this room is pretty full as well. So that's why we had to utilize the other room for basically because we have so much items of evidence, we had to install more shelves for that.
Yeah, we can talk about back to the forensic specialist. We're speaking of, like I said, they do manage the ins and outs of the day-to-day activities of downstairs in the forensics area. This also helps coordinate anything that's going to the lab or court. They're the gatekeepers, is what I would like to refer to them as. But it's just that they have a very important job of making sure the accuracy of everything that's coming in on the RLFEs, which are the requests for laboratory examinations, to make sure that what individuals are asking to be performed or what the lab can actually successfully complete. Then they will then in turn remove it from our evidence and transport it to the lab in Richmond. And also once it's there, they will pick up from the lab and bring back. Other things that go into our archive cases and other items of evidence. This is stuff that is unresolved cases that we still have as active within our department, have taken up large amounts of room, and they're specially put into one designated area that is actually at capacity now. And then they will help with me control the destruction of all items of evidence.
So these are just some more photographs. You have a photograph of an RFLE, like Sergeant Marshall kind of explained, basically asking, the items of evidence that needs to go down to the lab and just making sure that, they process it properly and see what they can and cannot do. Then you got the case file room, archive room. So this is mostly just the files, meaning they're not items of evidence. It's like case files that the investigations have created. Even our evidence tech case files are some of those are down there as well. These are just the older files that have been resolved and closed out. And then you got your evidence archive room. Like he was saying, it's definitely full to capacity. This is, like I said, unresolved cases, but these are where the items of evidence are stored. So you got the case file room, and then you got your evidence archive room. I'll talk about that. And then we got the destruction boxes. These were made way before I was here. They're actually very nice boxes. So you got the melt box, which you got everything that could be melted in there. Your guns, anything, drug paraphernalia, stuff like that that can be melted. Then you got your burn box, which is mostly where our narcotics go. So we have to do a burn of our narcotics. And then also your biohazard, whether it's, obviously DNA, blood, anything that has blood on it, it all has to go in there. But it's just biohazard. Yeah. Biohazard material.
Yeah. And what she has as an example to the one side is, you see it is listed as a burn barrel. That is by the means by which we actually do our drug destruction now. This is a unit that was developed and approved through the DEA for the assured destruction of narcotics. Periodically throughout the year, at this point, we're about once a quarter, we have to utilize this in order to destroy the amount of narcotics that have been seized by the department and are scheduled to be destroyed. Some of them were immediate destruction, some of them were done through court orders. But it is a tool that is relatively new to us that we've been utilizing for the last 6 months for the assured destruction of drugs.
So there's just a couple more slides. So I put this quote in here. I won't read it verbatim. You guys can go ahead and look at it yourself. So I was taught this quote when I went through the 40-hour basic course. I'm sure Sergeant Marshall has seen this quote as well. It's basically saying when you walk into a room, you're basically leaving evidence, whether it's a shoe wear impression, your DNA, if you touch a table with your fingerprints, hairs and fibers on your clothing that have fallen off into the room, even if you leave a part of your clothing inside of the room. It's basically saying, evidence is always left behind when you walk into a room or walk everywhere or when you're inside a crime scene. So we also have to be mindful of that too. We wear PPE, obviously, gloves all the time. If the scene's really bad, we'll put booties on, and also a Tyvek suits as well. Because like I said, hair, fibers, anything, you don't really want your DNA in the crime scene, because obviously we enter in the crime scene, we walk around, we have to collect items of evidence, so we have to just be mindful of that. So this is basically what we try to do with evidence. This is called the evidence leakage triangle. So you got your crime scene, suspect, and victim. With our evidence that we collect and we identify, we're trying to basically connect the suspect to the crime scene, the suspect to the victim to the crime scene, the victim to the suspect. Basically just trying to create a triangle with that. So the evidence that we collect hopefully will do that for investigations to further their investigations of the crime. So yeah, this is basically what we try to, do. Good. Yep. And then, yep, so that's all we got. You got any questions?
Thank you so much. That was really amazing. There are several really excellent questions, so I will just start with the first one. So this question is for Sergeant Marshall. In reference to shoe prints, I thought that the National Academies of PCAST, I don't know what that is, reports said that shoe prints are not good enough evidence for individualization. Has that changed?
Well, it is. Like I said, there's class system, which is overall, and then there's unique. And that's what I was referring to. Like, if you're wearing your shoes, your weight, your body, you wear your shoes differently than the next guy that bought the same exact pair of shoes that you did, at the same date and time. You go out, you step on things, you cut your shoes, you rip, part of the sole off, and you create unique ridges, and it compromises the original integrity of the shoe. They would have to have a direct comparison. So in other words, whether it be through the photograph documentation or through a cast, and then they can do direct comparisons at that point to be able to identify the unique characteristics that match up to that said shoe that you've now submitted to them.
Great, thank you. So the next question, this is for either or both of you. The CSI series shows investigators finding perfect fingerprints on all kinds of surfaces. How hard is it to find and recover a good fingerprint? Then what do you do with that print?
So I've been at a lot of crime scenes where, there's cups, bottles everywhere. So we collect all those items of evidence in order to see if we can get fingerprints off them in order to identify somebody at the scene. Now, you think you pick up a cup, you're obviously touching it. There should be fingerprints on there. I powder process it. I really can't find a lot, whether it's smudges and there's not enough detail in those fingerprints in order to make identification, or, maybe the weather has, deteriorated the fingerprint and I'm not able to obviously develop a print. It's definitely not as easy as it looks on TV. I will tell you that it is not as easy. I do a lot of swabbing of things. So, swab of DNA, I feel like that's a lot easier, but I've definitely powder processed a lot of cups, and finding fingerprints can be very difficult for sure.
Yeah, the cliche, get a needle in a haystack sometimes.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely, we're not solving crime in 30-minute episodes.
I do watch my fair share of CSI, though. I love CSI, so it's definitely not what it looks like on TV.
Next question. Can you remember a time that you documented a piece of evidence that seemed irrelevant or random that turned out to be an important part of solving a case?
I'll go back to the footwear impressions.
I was about to say the same thing. The footwear impressions are probably the coolest thing that I have actually, collected and documented and photographed and done the whole entire long process. I'm like, man, are we really going to find this shoe anywhere? But you cast it, you take your photographs of it, you do the due diligence in the crime scene process, and then obviously investigations will, hopefully develop a suspect, do a search warrant of the house, and boom, you hopefully find the similar shoe. I think that's like the coolest thing I've definitely,
Yeah.
processed and developed from a crime scene. That's definitely tied the suspect back to the scene because I mean, in the one scene, in the one case I am talking about, that's literally all we had was that footwear impression, and that's been several cases.
And that goes back to following the scene and the evidence, the logical progression, because witnesses, everyone has different perspectives of how they see things, and they may be telling you, oh, they went this way, but evidence is telling us they went the other way. And so we're like, it's over here, so we're going to document and collect it because this is our only opportunity to do just that, to collect, preserve, and identify. And then through later investigations and interviews, you realize, no, they went the other direction. And then that is, like you said, the only item that we link the person back to this particular incident, and then subsequent incidents that occurred within a short distance and time span.
Okay. It's all very complicated. So the next question, are either of you the folks who crawl around collecting the hairs and fibers from the carpets, or is that the techs you train? And then the second part of that is, of TV cop shows or whodunit movies, have any ever come anywhere near representing the actual work involved in forensics?
To answer, we all share the responsibility of crawling around in the attic, the crawl space, the woods. Again, back to the level of the particular incident we're investigating is into whether it be a secondary tech or a primary tech or forensic technician. So we all share that to some level.
We've all been trained, me and Marshall have had more training than some of our current techs and evidence technicians, but we've all been trained in the basic knowledge of processing a crime scene. So, we all can crawl around and look for hairs and fibers for sure. We can all photograph. But yeah.
Back to the question about the reality of some of these shows. They're probably about 30% accurate and 70%
Absolutely.
misdirection or inaccurate.
Even with the lab stuff, I mean, you see within one episode, you'll get a fingerprint back. With us, the lab is so backed up, it can take months to get DNA, fingerprints, firearms back from the lab. Obviously, because the lab isn't just dealing with our jurisdiction, they're dealing with several surrounding jurisdictions. But yeah, that's one big pet peeve is, oh, boom, you send it through a system, you get an immediate hit, but that's not how it works. It takes months for us to get, records and reports back from the lab.
So how many labs are there servicing the Commonwealth of Virginia? Or I thought you said there was one, but it sounds like there's.
There are, Gail. There are multiple labs. We're broken down regionally throughout the state. We report to the Central Lab, which is located in Richmond, Virginia. But then there's a Northern Lab in Manassas. Down in Norfolk, there's an Eastern Lab, and then I believe it's in Roanoke is the Western Lab. And depending on the region where you're at, it breaks down, and it goes back to demographics, population size, and submission also, because the Western Lab can handle other things that can be farmed out from the other labs if they are over inundated. But respectfully, we've identified our regional lab that we actually submit to, and then they can divert if needed from there.
Okay, great. Here's another question. Thank you. This is also amazing. What are your well, I guess it sounds like this was just answered, your biggest pet peeves about forensic TV dramas. But I think an important second question here is, what do you wish people knew about real life versus TV shows? It sounds like the time is a big part of it.
Yeah, it's very time intense. Like Detective Sally was saying, like even down to whether it's them developing a DNA profile. The algorithms that are run and the tests that are done, it literally is months for them to run the test, get a result, and if it's a strong enough result, then they do internal auditing of themselves where this scientist then passes it to another scientist to review their findings, and then they go to a peer review board, and then it has to be all in agreement that what the results they've had represent accurately, and then they'll issue out as a report at that time. That was DNA, but for the firearm sections are the same way. They capture images of the, like a cartridge casing. They capture, image of the head. They submit it into the system. The system is actually for the ATF is in the main facilities in Huntsville, Alabama, and it takes months for it to run the algorithm for it will give the actual report confirming. So again, back to, hey, we're on this thing, and hey, there it is. This is the exact same one. Some people are specialize in different skills like firearms, fingerprint analysis, DNA. They can give some preliminary information, but all these individuals at the lab are scientists, and they're just not going to issue out any sort of premature results to us. So unfortunately, that means we're invested for months waiting on these results.
And also, crime scenes aren't as perfect as you see on TV either. I mean, usually for us, we have to go searching for our items of evidence, and you won't ever have that perfect shoe wear impression or that perfect fingerprint. Usually there's smudges, or you have to look for additional places to find other fingerprints. It's never what it looks like on TV, definitely.
What a surprise. Thank you. How long do you maintain evidence is the next question. It sounds like it is very varied.
It depends again on the nature of the incident. Major crimes or those of historical value are maintained for the most part indefinitely. But traditionally, we have to look at different factors. The nature of the crime, was it a misdemeanor? Was it a felony assault? Things that are resolved in general district court upon adjudication or the completion of that particular charge, the individual, if found guilty, they have an appeals process of 10 days from general district court. If they don't file that appeal within that time frame, then the evidence can then in turn be disposed of through court order or permission from owners at that point. If it makes it to circuit court, there's a 12-month appeals process. And then depending on, again, the crime, if it's a homicide, we'd like to maintain longer on those and have the individuals that are the majority of the way through their sentencing to make sure there's not an appeal based off of procedural issue through the courts, so that we still have it for analysis later. Most of it we maintain for a matter of just a few months after general district, to some that we've had in our, I inherited it when I took over this position, that have been in our system since the 60s that we have here. They're unresolved, so we will keep them indefinitely until we can try to resolve that case. But once they're resolved, there's a timetable that sets forth. We're not governed on the property to the same level that the records are. Any certificates or reports, the Library of Congress, Library of Virginia dictate mandated time frames for them. Okay. So I know that's a lot, but that's best I can answer that.
Well, it's complicated. Next question, is there continuing education and or proficiency tests that you have to take?
Continuing education, definitely the whole, COVID has kind of put a damper on training for us a bit. But yes, we do try to do that. We also have, we try to do monthly in-house training once a month, 8 hours usually, with everybody as a unit, including our evidence technicians. If you want to get proficient in, let's say bloodstained pattern analysis or trajectory work or anything like that, there is additional training that we can go to. We just kind of have to get it approved and everything. But yes, there's a lot of additional training we can go to.
Great, thank you. And then the last question, is the forensic files show only 30% accurate too?
I've never seen that.
It's maybe a little more accurate, but again, unfortunately, when you watch these shows, they're not divulging all the techniques or capability that both law enforcement and forensics have the capability of, because then in turn you have people who will try to manipulate a crime scene or either sanitize a crime scene, and some of it is universal and it's just common knowledge. Then others are techniques that aren't relatively divulged. So that is a more accurate series compared to others.
CSI is more 30%.
Okay, all right. Well, this has been so amazing and so fascinating. Thank you both for taking the time to help us understand more about what you do. The next Lunch and Learn is Wednesday, March 17th at noon, and the topic is recruiting and retention. And we hope to see you there. In the meantime, stay safe, stay dry, stay warm with the coming weather. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.